Eagles are always on our mind, and it is 4 o'clock, which means we turn things over to John McMullen. Johnny Mac, our 97.3 Eagles insider, also writes a national football column for FanRagSports.com. And John, we'll bring you in with this, my little ditty of this. San Diego Superchargers, San Diego. But they're not in San Diego anymore. However, they did sign an Eagles running back who's no longer an Eagle, Kenyon Barner. Let's talk about that news first and foremost and what that means for the Birds.
Well, first I have to disagree. I think spring training baseball is life and death. I think you should do pitch-by-pitch updates. But, yeah, neither is Kenyon Barner for that matter, life or death. But, yeah, he's got a new home in Los Angeles like Connor Barwin, but they're not teammates playing on opposite teams. Kenyon goes to be a backup to Melvin Gordon with the Chargers. And, you know, the Eagles didn't tender him, so he would have been a restricted free agent, but they didn't give him a tender. That made him unrestricted. He could go wherever he wanted, and that's pretty clear indication that they didn't want him back. So I wouldn't be too concerned, but that's another position that the Eagles will look to address in the draft because they need a difference maker at that position. Ryan Matthews is going to be cut at some point when he's able to pass a physical, and that leaves you with really only Darren Sproles and Wendell Smallwood and a bunch of second-year players in Byron Marshall and Terrell Wilson and players like that. So it's definitely another one of those positions that you're going to see at least one or possibly two bodies added in the draft.
So you say draft, not signing somebody, because the running back market has been slow to develop. Why do you think it's been so slow to develop of free agent running backs?
Well, I think because the league as a whole has devalued the position, and they feel that you can get guys in the draft that can help you for lesser money. So it makes it very difficult, especially for veteran running backs. Like Adrian Peterson would be the biggest example of someone who thinks he should still be paid at a very, very high level. The NFL looks at that differently, and they think they could get similar production, especially in this draft, very deep at the running back position. And there's going to be guys that can contribute going in the second and third round. So when you look at building a roster, it's always better if you have a young guy who doesn't cost very much.
Well, you talk about Adrian Peterson, and you think of guys like Latavius Murray, and these are established guys. So you mentioned the draft. Who are some of the names the Eagles should be looking at running back in the draft?
Well, the big name that's getting a lot of publicity right now because he had a tremendous combine was Christian McCaffrey, the running back from Stanford, the son of Ed McCaffrey, the old Broncos receiver. And there's a lot of people that think he's going so far up the board that he might be in play for the Eagles at number 14 overall. And, yeah, I'll tell you, he's got – there's some size issues there, so you wonder if he could hold up being sort of a bell cow back, the guy who can carry it 25 times. But as far as being a football player, he's as well-rounded as it gets. He was running, according to a number of scouts I talked to, he was running routes better than a receiver. I mean, he could do it all. And he would be an electric addition to this team. But you also look at Fournette from LSU, Cook from Florida State, and then the big controversy would be surrounding Joe Mixon of Oklahoma because he's another first-round talent, but he's got the off-the-field issues. And so he's a guy maybe that would be tremendous value from a football sense that could fall into the second, maybe even the third round.
John, is it really smart for the Eagles to go running back in the first round, considering they have other issues of things that they need? And, you know, you can get running backs in the second, third, and fourth rounds, and even fifth round.
Yeah, you can, but I'm always wary of drafting for position. You know, they say Brian Billick was the first one who told me, but it's constantly repeated, that need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. And the fact if you're going to reach for a certain position and overlook a better player, it tends to work out very, very poorly. The Sidney Jones injury is really complicating things for the Eagles because that's their biggest need, that position. And that's a player that probably would go right in that range, right in that 14 to 17 range. And all of a sudden he tears his Achilles. So do you want to reach for a guy who maybe shouldn't go till 20 or 25 because you have that need? Or would you rather take a player who's as dynamic as McCaffrey and also you have a need at that position? Remember, Darren Sproles is already announced basically his retirement. This is going to be his last season. So you have to look at it that way as well. And to get a kid like that who could play 3 downs, a 3-down back, it's very, very valuable, even though the NFL has gone in a different direction and says it isn't. Because if you look at the Super Bowl, who was the MVP of the Super Bowl? Well, obviously it was Tom Brady, but it could have been James White. I mean, who's a running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield. And McCaffrey, when he hits the NFL, wherever he lands, he's going to be one of the best receiving backs in football the day he steps on a practice field. That's how good he is running routes. So, you know, you could also talk about edge rusher, Josh, because they still need a pass rusher. So there's a number of ways the Eagles could go. But if you're looking for one player that's rapidly on the ascent, I think it's McCaffrey.
John, you read my mind because my next question was going to be, when are the Eagles going to address the defense? And I don't mean Dwayne Gratz.
Well, you know, the problem is they didn't have many assets heading into free agency. They had less than $7 million when this all started. And they don't have a lot of wiggle room to address things in free agency. And their first plan A was to build up around Carson Wentz, and they had to do that with the receivers. And they were able to get that accomplished. But once you do that, they really don't have any wiggle room to do much more on the free agency market. And it's basically dry anyway. All the meaningful players are gone, except you can argue some of the running backs, as Pete mentioned. So there's not a lot you can do at this point. And from, you know, this point forward, it's got to be the draft, and it's got to be trades or something of that nature. And there's no question, if it doesn't come at number 14 overall, they're going to add multiple bodies at cornerback. It's very deep. It's probably the deepest position in the draft. It might be the second round, the third round, the fourth round. But they're going to add multiple bodies at that position.
That would make Mike Gill happy, who said that he thinks that they should go corner, corner, corner in rounds 2, 3, and 4. That's music to his ears, I'm sure, John. John McMullen with us, who covers the Eagles for us for 97.3 ESPN and also covers national football stories for FanRag Sports.com. So, John, there's some national news out there today about the Michigan coach, who used to be the Niners coach. His name is Jim Harbaugh, and he's trying to vouch for his guy, Colin Kaepernick. Says he can be great again. Do you agree with that?
I think Jim's been paying too much attention to his own football team, which he should, and he's doing a heck of a job at Michigan. But no, Colin Kaepernick is not a championship-level quarterback at this stage, and anybody who saw him play last year kind of understands that. And, you know, there's this weird controversy because of the politics aspect of it that people think he's being blackballed from the NFL. I will just say that, you know, decision makers in this league would eat their young if it made them win. They don't care if Colin Kaepernick kneels during the national anthem, if he can help win football games. And most of the people in this league don't think he's a starting level quarterback any longer for a number of issues. Partially, he's had injuries. He had 3 off-season surgeries last year and was feuding with the 49ers at the team, didn't rehabilitate at the facility. And when he came back, he wasn't the same guy physically. So I think a lot of people think about Colin Kaepernick when he was in the Super Bowl or going to the NFC Championship games, and they don't realize he's not that same guy. He's not the big 240-pounder that's just dual threat. He's had a lot of issues, and we'll see if he can get it back and be further along from those injuries and become that type of athlete again. But then you have to look at it, is he good enough to be a backup? He's certainly good enough, but what I don't think people understand is there's a method to building rosters. And when you're looking for a backup quarterback, you want a certain type of player. And for instance, here with Carson Wentz or Jared Goff or in Los Angeles or some of the other younger quarterbacks in this league. What do you want in a backup quarterback? You want a veteran guy who knows the offense, who can teach him how to be a professional, do all the things off the field. That's not Colin Kaepernick. And then if you have a veteran quarterback, say like Ben Roethlisberger, what do you want? If he's injured for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, what you want is some guy who can come in and play your offense and hopefully keep your head above water for that 3 weeks. What you don't want is a guy who's going to make you completely change your offense and play a totally different style of football. So while people might say, well, Colin Kaepernick's better than Landry Jones, he might be, but not for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think people kind of overlook there's a method to roster building, and that's part of it. Another example, look at a different position. If you guys say you're the 5th wide receiver or the 6th linebacker on the team, you're probably not the 5th best receiver, but you're a good special teams player. And that's how you fit in on the roster. So it's not always about just pure talent. And I think people are kind of misguided when they're saying Colin Kaepernick is blackballed.
John, Kaepernick, Griffin, is it time for these guys to start following what Vince Young just did, is go to the CFL, not as late as Vince Young did. Vince Young probably went there 4 years too late. But is it time for some of these guys to swallow their ego, go up north, and prove that they can still be quarterbacks?
Well, I think that's a better route for somebody like Johnny Manziel, who's got a lot to prove. I mean, for a guy like Kaepernick and even RG3, they have to get over the hump to understand that they're backups. I'm not even sure they've gotten over that hump. They still think they're starting level quarterbacks. So they're certainly not going to go to the CFL, and they're certainly not going to swallow their ego and do something of that nature. Could it help them? Sure. I think quarterback's the one position, and we learned that back. People remember NFL Europe, or when they changed it to NFL Europa, if Pete remembers that. People would mock that. The one thing it did was develop quarterbacks, whether it was Brad Johnson with the London Monarchs or Kurt Warner or Jake Delhomme, players like that. And you can't learn to be a quarterback unless you're playing on the field, getting repetition. And the way the CBA is set up now, you just don't have that ability in the NFL. So there's no way to develop quarterbacks. Jim Harbaugh also talked about that today when he made the Kaepernick comments, and there's got to be other avenues to do it. So it would make sense from that standpoint, but those guys are just, like I said, they're not willing to accept their NFL backups, never mind that they have to go to the CFL.
John, speaking of guys who used to play in Philadelphia, I mentioned Vince Young earlier. Another guy is Kiko Alonso. He has signed a 3-year extension with the Dolphins. He is now one of the highest paid linebackers in football. So did he deserve that kind of money? Or are the Dolphins just betting on the fact that he fits what they're doing?
Well, it's a little better because originally it was reported as a 3-year. It looks like it's a 4-year deal, so it's not quite as pricey. But it's still he played very well last season. And dating back to the trade, that was the one issue I would talk about with Mike. I didn't necessarily agree with that from an Eagles standpoint because when Kiko Alonso was here, he was hurt. He was not himself, and it was clear. It was evident. And if you go back to him in Buffalo, he was a heck of a football player. And now that he was completely healthy and he was a full year off the injury and then farther away from also the re-injury here, he started to look like the same guy he was in Buffalo. And I think that might have been a bit of a mistake for the Eagles to give up on him. But then you also have to realize he was part of the formula that got them Carson Wentz. So you have to weigh both sides of it. But he's a really, really good linebacker when he's healthy.
John, other NFL news around the league today about Sidney Jones. He's one of the top projected cornerbacks in the drafts. He's had surgery today. And the word is that he thinks he's going to be able to play this season, and reports are coming out that he'll be able to start running in about 4 months. So does this news help his draft stock?
No. As I mentioned before, I mean, he would have been in play for the Eagles at 14. He's not going to be a first-round pick now. I think somebody will take a chance on him in the second round. But certainly that hurt him dramatically. If this were the Sixers, he wouldn't play next year, despite the fact that, and they would probably draft him at 14. But it's not. It's the Philadelphia Eagles, and unfortunately for the kid, he ruptured his Achilles on his pro day, and hopefully he's able to make it back at some point next season. It's doubtful though, and it's more likely that it'll be sort of a redshirt year, and we'll get things going in his second NFL season, and hopefully he can recover. It's always a concern with thoroughbreds like that, cornerbacks, wide receivers. Anytime they have an injury like an Achilles, you have to wonder if they're going to make it all the way back athletically.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, also covers the league for FanRagSports.com. Yesterday, John, we spent some time talking about Marshawn Lynch, maybe to the Raiders. And, of course, you accurately pointed out, but where will those Raiders be? Today we find out where has Marshawn been. Even his own agent hasn't been in touch with him, as he's been in Canada. What's the latest on Marshawn Lynch?
Well, same thing. If he's going to play, he's going to play for the Oakland Raiders. And it looks like he's not concerned with the fact that they might be moving to Las Vegas in 2 years. So obviously it would be a very short shelf life. And obviously that's a significant Super Bowl contender. You could have argued if Derek Carr doesn't get hurt, they would have been the Patriots' biggest issue in the playoffs last season. It's a heck of a football team. They probably have the second best offensive line behind the Cowboys. They're ripe to make a significant run. So it's a perfect spot for him to potentially land and get another Super Bowl ring and get out. And it's one of those teams where you're willing to look at a veteran player who can maybe put you over the hump. So a lot of it makes sense, but I got to tell you, he did not. I think people forget his last season. He was very banged up. Thomas Rawls was actually better than he was after Lynch got hurt, and he just did not perform very well. And to assume that he's going to take a year off of football and return and be the same kind of guy he was in his prime in Seattle, I'm not sure that's going to happen. So it's a gamble, but obviously the Raiders have a need at the position with Latavius Murray moving on, and We'll see if it works out, but it certainly at least makes sense when you read the tea leaves.
John, the Jets, they're a mess. Let's be realistic. So they signed Josh McCown.
That's not doing it for you?
And now they have strong interest, quote unquote, are the reports, in Mitch Trubisky. This is after they've already drafted 3 quarterbacks. They don't seem to like any of those guys. So, when are the Jets going to get this quarterback thing figured out? And explain to me the interest by a team that has had issues with quarterbacks, interested in a guy who hasn't even started 20 games in a college career.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, they're desperate, and by definition, Josh McCown is a bridge quarterback, and I call the Jets the bridge to nowhere because they constantly do this. They had it with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he was the bridge to nowhere, and now they have the Josh McCown. On the one hand, though, I like the fact that while they won't admit it publicly, the Jets kind of know they made a mistake with Christian Hackenberg. So you can pretend you didn't and say we think he's going to develop and say all those things, but the reality is they know that's not going to happen. So, hey, the best thing to do if you make a mistake is to admit it and move on. The Jets need the long-term answer at the quarterback position, and they're going to be in a spot where they can get one of the top 3 quarterbacks in this draft. And I think that's the way they should go. Because obviously, until you get the answer at that position, you're just spinning your wheels.
Never underestimate a 6-run, top of the 9th. Phillies win 9-5. John, I know you were dying for that Phillies spring training update.
Well, it's funny, one of the old newsrooms I used to work in, there was a big Phillies fan, and I kid you not, guys, he would sit and watch spring training baseball like it was life and death. Every pitch would scream at the TV when they made a boneheaded play, and I would just look at him like he had 8 heads.
Right. It is spring training, not the real season. That starts in a couple weeks from now. But John McMullen starts with us every day at this time at 4 o'clock and brings the good stuff on the NFL. We appreciate it, John. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you, guys.